All right. Well, good morning, and thank you all for joining us for the first Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation's monthly economic briefing of 2021. It's wonderful to virtually see everyone once again in this new year. Today, we are joined by LAEDC CEO Bill Allen, as well as the director of the LAEDC's Institute for Applied Economics, Shannon Sedgwick. I'd like to now introduce the CEO of Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation, Bill Allen.
As Shane said, it's great to see you all for the first of our 2021 economic briefings on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our region's population, occupations, and industry sectors. While we continue to see, unprecedented impacts and recognize with deep concern the disparate impact on certain industries, occupations, and segments of our population, we are nevertheless encouraged by many recent developments, including the rollout since the last time we briefed you of the first two vaccines we have long awaited. My colleague Shannon Sedgwick, who leads our Institute for Applied Economics, will update you this morning on the latest data we have available related to the virus and to the distribution of vaccines in our region and the continued impacts on employment in key sectors, occupations, and populations here in LA County. We offer this briefing to you today as a precursor to our annual economic forecast, which will take place on the morning of February 17, and provide even more extensive information on where we find ourselves today and where we see the region going in the years ahead. I sincerely encourage each and every one of you with us this morning to register to attend that February economic forecast for the LAEDC. We'll be bringing some of the nation's most respected thought leaders on inclusive economic recovery for America's metropolitan regions to share their insights with you. And we will have a number of breakout sessions you can participate in on aspects of that recovery here in the LA region. You'll hear more details about the event and how to register from Shane at the end of this morning's briefing, but please do plan to join us on February 17. In the meantime, we at the LAEDC are encouraged by the presence of a new administration in Washington, which is fully committed to defeating the virus, as that will be absolutely essential to our economic recovery. And we look forward to working with them on a number of different aspects of rebuilding not only the economy we had, but reinventing a new economy that can be truly aligned with our vision, more inclusive, more sustainable, and more resilient for all. We've been weathering together a very difficult winter in which we collectively made many sacrifices during the governor's recent regional stay-at-home orders to help prevent our hospital systems from becoming overwhelmed due to the rapid spread of the virus, which occurred post the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. Fortunately, with some of the recent developments in the curves that we've been tracking, we are encouraged that just this morning, Governor Newsom officially ended his regional stay-at-home orders in our region, as well as the Central Valley and Bay Area regions where these orders had been in place. He did so as a result of declining new case rates and hospitalizations and the desire to bring some measure of relief to the hardest hit sectors of our state economy. You'll hear more about those sectors from Shannon. We await with anticipation the decision of our own LA County Department of Public Health, whether we in LA County will also be able to resume outdoor dining and personal services as other areas of the state will now be able to enjoy. But whenever they do, we want to remind you all, we must remain safer at work. You see this logo over my shoulder here, Safer at Work Los Angeles. This is our countywide campaign in partnership with the Workforce Development, Aging, and Community Services Department of LA County, in which we are both absolutely committed to helping keep those of us who have remained in essential occupations in recent months safe in the workplace. And as more of us are allowed to return to the workplace, we must do everything we can as employers, as employees, as patrons of businesses or organizations of any type to help keep people safer in the workplace. It's not only the right thing to do from a health perspective and a moral perspective, but from an economic perspective, it will allow us to keep these sectors that are allowed to reopen open in the months ahead as more and more of us are able to receive the vaccine and move towards the other side of this terrible pandemic. With so many Californians and Americans now willing to get the vaccine when available, there is obvious frustration at the pace of vaccine distribution all across this country. Yet we would remind everyone that this is an unprecedented level of demand that we are experiencing. And we have, in fact, in very short order, managed to vaccinate millions across the country and a few 100,000 right here of our heroic frontline healthcare workers and our most vulnerable seniors, although we certainly have a long way to go. We are optimistic at the LAEDC that local, state, and national government working in partnership with the private sector increasingly will manage to continue to increase the vaccination rates so that we can get to the herd immunity that we all yearn for in this society. We're also encouraged by the current availability of federal, state, and local relief dollars for small businesses and individuals. And we sincerely applaud our public and private partners who've been working over the last 10 months, but particularly in the last few months, to get unprecedented levels of capital out here in our region, LA County, LA City, so many partners of ours, the LA Chamber, LISC LA, so many others have worked heroically. Now, working with the state, our CDFIs are doing incredible work to get state relief capital out. The PPP programs have reopened now, and our partners in the financial institutions are accepting applications again and seeing the same sort of unprecedented demand for federal relief capital. But it is encouraging to us to see the rate at which our government partners, working in concert with private partners as well, are connecting individuals and enterprises in greatest need with the capital necessary to be able to survive this pandemic. There isn't enough public or private capital to address the challenges that our small business and even nonprofit communities have been facing. But what capital there is must get to the right people as quickly as possible. And we continue to play an active role in that through our Community Connectory initiative, through our Business Assistance initiative, and through other work that we do at the LAEDC in collaboration with many partners in the region. But we applaud all those partners for the work they have done. And we certainly hope to see additional federal resources coming and state resources coming, as the governor has announced. And know that that will be essential to this transitional period as we all endeavor to get enough people vaccinated to where this threat from the COVID-19 pandemic is lessened to the point that we can fully reopen our economy. So to give you more detail and color on all that, I'm going to turn the platform over to my colleague, who I know you actually all come to hear from each month, and that is Shannon Cedric, the director of our Institute for Applied Economics. Shannon, the platform is all yours.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the LAEDC for today's economic briefing. I hope that you and your families are continuing to stay well, stay safe, and to social distance as we make our way through the end of the second wave of COVID-19. We've officially made it through 2020, and I'm wishing you all a healthy and prosperous new year. And speaking of the new year, a whole year has passed since the CDC announced its first confirmed case of COVID-19 in the US back on January 21st. And while we still find ourselves dealing with the pandemic, vaccines are currently being distributed, which gives hope that we may start to return to some normalcy as we make our way through 2021. Before we dive into the data I'll be presenting today, I wanted to recap where we were when we had our last webinar just before Halloween, as a lot has changed since then. In mid-October, we were on the precipice of a second wave of infections. We saw new case numbers rising globally and across the US, but California and Los Angeles County weren't yet following that trend. We saw many people increasing contact with non-household members over the holidays, which in turn increased the number of opportunities for transmission of COVID-19. Key metrics started to show steep increases in community spread as measured by daily new cases, infection rates, hospitalizations, and deaths. California saw a case rate rise of about 50% during the first week in November, and new health orders were issued thereafter, reinstating restrictions on certain activities. The limited stay-at-home order, effective November 21st, asked individuals in counties in the purple widespread tier to stay at home between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. And concerns over the number of available adult intensive care unit beds in the state of California led to the regional stay-at-home order that Bill just mentioned, and that supplemental order to that, which for regions when the adult ICU bed capacity falls below 15%, calls for reduced capacity at all retail establishments. It suspends on-site dining options, and modifies operations pursuant to the state's applicable sector guidance, and prohibited hotel or lodging entities from accepting or honoring out-of-state reservations for non-essential travel. So currently, as of this weekend, most of the counties in the state are in the most restrictive purple tier. The map from our last webinar in mid-October can be seen in the bottom corner for comparison on where we were then and where we are now. The distribution of COVID-19 vaccines in Los Angeles County has begun. Los Angeles County opened 5 large-scale coronavirus vaccination sites last week, including the Forum in Inglewood, Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, Cal State Northridge, the Fairplex in Pomona, and the LA County Office of Education's Downey Education Center. Additionally, Dodger Stadium has been set up as a vaccination site by the city of Los Angeles. The county has received 490,995 doses of the vaccine, 82,875 of which are second doses. So thus far, as of January 10th, 33.6% of first doses received have been expended, and 7.4% of the second doses received have been expended. The USC Center for Economic and Social Research's Understanding Coronavirus in America tracking survey, which is updated daily, asked individuals in Los Angeles County about the likelihood of getting a vaccine. And approximately 65% of respondents indicated that they were very likely or somewhat likely to get a coronavirus vaccine if available. Let's take stock of where we currently stand with the number of COVID-19 cases. LA County is a leading hotspot of COVID-19 cases. Last week, we became the first county in the nation to record 1 million total COVID-19 cases, and the first case of the new, more contagious coronavirus strain first reported in the UK was confirmed. So going forward, we'll be watching to see if the new strain will increase the spread of the virus here as it has in other areas. As of Friday, the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health reported cases were reaching towards 1.1 million with over 15,000 deaths. Last Thursday, the LA County Department of Public Health announced the 7-day average for daily new cases of COVID-19 reached just over 6,200. This is well below the 7-day average high of 15,200 new daily cases that we saw on January 8th. On Friday, just under 6,900 people with COVID-19 were hospitalized, with 24% in the ICU. And this was the first time that daily hospitalizations decreased under 7,000 patients since December 27th. The decline in both of these metrics, the 7-day average of new cases and decline in hospitalizations, means that the second wave is essentially behind us and that we may once again follow the 4-tier blueprint for a safer economy to permit the gradual reopening of certain businesses and activities. With continued and reinstated restrictions, we still are experiencing high levels of unemployment with a very significant number of people without jobs. The number of workers receiving unemployment benefits it remains disturbingly high. And while we saw the number of claimants start to begin to decline between August to about mid-October, the number of claims since then had remained relatively flat before increasing again towards the end of December. So this implies that the recovery process has stalled during that second wave. According to latest data, the California Employment Development Department has processed close to 19.5 million claims since the pandemic began in March through the regular UI program. Through that regular UI program, through reopened and extension claims, as well as the separate pandemic unemployment assistance program, and total unemployment benefits paid to California workers during the COVID-19 pandemic has reached $114 billion. So unemployment insurance remains a lifeline for employees in hard-hit service sectors, particularly as stay-at-home orders change and come back into effect related to new cases. On December 27th, then President Trump signed legislation passed by Congress that extended federal unemployment benefits that were set to expire at the end of the year. California has the largest number of PUA claimants in the US, which made the state's economy vulnerable to the impacts of having these programs expire. Los Angeles County would have been especially hard hit by that drop off in these two programs, with more than 320,000 individuals losing PUA and the PUOED benefits by December 26th. So in addition to extending that pandemic unemployment assistance, PUA, and the pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, that's the PEUC extension benefits, recipients of all state and federal unemployment benefits will also receive the new supplemental $300 federal additional compensation payments with their weekly benefits beginning the week of December 27th for 11 weeks through March 13th of 2021. Now, this supplemental payment will augment California's maximum weekly benefit of $450 per week, which puts the payments just above the living wage threshold for a single adult, which is $600 per week. When we look at the latest demographic breakout of those filing for unemployment benefits throughout the pandemic, we've seen that the pandemic's disparate impact by race, age, and gender remain. In the week ending November 14th, which is the most recent data available, 42% of the Black labor force, 24% of females in the labor force, and 31% of the labor force ages 20 to 24 years filed continuing claims for UI benefits. And if we look at the number of UI claimants at the neighborhood level, we see that neighborhoods in poorer neighborhoods and those with more reported COVID cases are also displaying higher shares of their pre-pandemic labor force are filing unemployment insurance claims. Back in October, we had warned that a rise in the number of new cases may once again lead to additional restrictions to mitigate the spread of the virus. And that is exactly what happened. And while it may take time to truly understand the consequences of changing health orders in terms of business closures, we can see that they did have an impact on employment based on the newly released LA County employment data covering the month of December. In December, unemployment rose to 11% in LA County. Payroll employment was hit hardest in March and April, with the unemployment rate reaching over 20% each month, April and May. Since then, the employment situation had been improving. In November, we saw that LA County unemployment rate dropped to its lowest level since March. However, December's data ended that trend. Civilian employment decreased by 67,000 to just under 4.4 million in December. And while the net number of those considered unemployed decreased by 4,000 to 540,000, it was largely due to those who are unemployed falling out of the labor force. The civilian labor force decreased by 71,000 over the month to 4.9 million. March and April had the most severe restrictions. Since then, the health orders have allowed many types of businesses to modify their operations and remain open with restrictions, which means it's highly unlikely that we'll see a peak in unemployment similar to that early on in the pandemic. However, it will continue to remain difficult for unemployment to fall rapidly while restrictive health orders are in place and those virus-related shocks continue. If we look at the monthly change in LA County's unemployment rate, we see that November was the 6th consecutive month that the unemployment rate fell. From May of 2020 to November of 2020, the unemployment rate fell from 21.1% to 10.9%. That's a drop of 10.2 percentage points over that period. In December, the rate rose 0.1 percentage points over November's rate. And it's still 6.7 percentage points higher than LA County's unemployment rate in December of last year. From November to December, non-farm employment in LA County, it reversed its seasonal growth trend and reported a decline of 23,900 jobs. But again, job growth was mixed across the industries. A change in health orders, which increased restrictions for certain types of businesses, negatively impacted employment in a number of industries, including accommodation and food services, which shed 31,900 jobs over the month due to on-site outdoor dining options being lost and accommodation mandated to refuse guests engaged in non-essential interstate travel. Zoos and museums and card rooms, they faced reinstated restrictions, as did hair salons. And we see that these industries also experienced job losses over the month. Industries that continued to add jobs included professional and business services, transportation, warehousing and utilities, retail trade, and healthcare services and social assistance. The month-over-month employment trends, if we look at monthly growth rates from 2019 through the end of 2020 across various industries in LA County, we see how volatile job recovery has been for some of the hardest hit industries. While the December report showed some positive changes from the prior month, from November, here we again see that overall employment in LA County is still significantly, year over year below what it was in 2019. So almost all industry sectors have experienced employment contractions year over year. And if we look at year over year employment trends, we really see which industries have been hardest hit. And we'll take a closer look at their employment through the pandemic in just a bit for a selection of them. So overall, LA County experienced the greatest job loss associated with the measures to mitigate the spread of the virus between March and April, when more than 716,000 jobs fell off of county non-farm payrolls. Since then, we have added close to 45% of those jobs back as we are working our way through the phased reopening process. We experienced a minor setback with the second round of closures that took place in July during the first wave of the virus. And we just experienced another minor setback in late November and December when the governor issued the order for the third round of mandated closures for certain types of businesses and activities due to a spike in the number of cases in LA County that were related to the cold and flu season and people traveling and being exposed to members of other households over the holidays. So here is the first and one of the hardest hit industries that we've identified have been hardest hit, and that is food services and drinking places. As you see, this is very responsive to changes in health orders. Coming out of our April, in May and June, restaurants and bars were allowed to open. Bars, very briefly, I think for a period of 2 weeks, were allowed to open. And you can see that job growth took place in those 2 months. As health orders changed and indoor dining options weren't allowed, you could see that employment faltered a bit. And in July and August, there was very, very little job growth and some declines. Once we started with on-site outdoor dining options, with restaurants allowing more, typically indoor operations to set up outside, we saw jobs start to pick up again. And with the change in the order in late November and in December that once again restricted on-site outdoor dining options, we see that we lost close to 30,000 jobs in the month of December in this industry. So can you go back real quick? As it stands now, at the end of December, only 32.5% of the 185,000 jobs that were lost in the food services and drinking places industry between the months of March and April have been recovered at this point. Okay. Another industry that's been hardest, that has been hard hit throughout the pandemic has been the motion picture and sound recording industry. And of course, production came to a halt and didn't really rebound. While production was allowed to resume in June, due to labor negotiations, they really didn't start a lot of activity until the end of September. And of course, with the number of cases starting to spread, the industry is receiving a lot of pressure on whether they should resume production or not, or have additional restrictions. As you can see, only 16.7% of the 57,400 jobs that the industry lost in March and April have returned. And one of the reasons why this industry is also vulnerable is there's a high number of gig workers associated with the motion picture and television industry that work on a project by project basis. And many of those are individuals who are receiving unemployment benefits through that pandemic, the PUA program through the EDD. And that's why with that expiration date of the end of the year looming in December, we were really happy to see the extension beyond that cutoff when it was signed on December 27th. Arts, entertainment, and recreation. This is an industry that includes anything from professional sports to concert venues, to theaters and and museums and zoos. And of course, those are all activities that are still heavily restricted. And so you see that only 38.3% of those 41,200 jobs lost in the arts, entertainment, and recreation industry over the months of March and April have actually returned as of the end of the year. Next. Personal and laundry services. This includes personal care industries, so your hair salons, your nail salons, your massage establishments. And what we see here is that in December, once again, there were restrictions that went into place with hair salons and barbershops. And so you see a decline in that employment. And while nail salons have been allowed to stay open, they're still operating under strict restrictions in terms of capacity. I think they're only allowed to do 20 to 25%. So we're not seeing a lot of rebounding happening in this industry because its growth is heavily dictated by the health orders that are in place at the time. So only 30.1% of the 28,200 jobs that were lost in the industry in March and April have returned by the end of last year. Finally, we look at the accommodation industry, and this industry has been one that I don't think you can say has recovered at all. So only 3.6% of the 22,100 jobs lost in the industry in March and April have returned. And with the tourism industry falling flat, it's this particular industry has been impacted severely. So you can see even in the monthly job gains that are taking place, the job gains are very minimal when you compare to what's been taking place in other industries. I couldn't resist. So throughout the pandemic, we at the LAEDC have been saying that a true economic recovery won't be underway until a vaccine is widely distributed. Mandated restrictions are lifted, and people feel safe enough to resume their pre-pandemic behaviors, such as traveling, attending concerts and sporting events, and dining indoors at restaurants. And while vaccines are promising future interventions, we are in the beginning stages of their distribution. As such, doing our part to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 by wearing masks, washing our hands, practicing social distancing, limiting non-essential travel and activities, avoiding contact with members of other households, and of course, getting vaccinated when it's our turn. It's now more important than ever. And so we urge you to continue to do your part to be safer at home and safer at work to help avoid future health orders that put the trajectory of our economic recovery at risk. The new year brings change and it brings hope. We have a new stimulus bill that was signed, which extended important CARES Act provisions, such as extended unemployment benefits through the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program, and unemployment benefits extended to business owners, the self-employed, and independent contractors through the expanded Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. So both of those programs were set to expire at the end of the year, which could have been disastrous for LA County. Additionally, supplemental unemployment benefit payments were reinstated for the next few months, this time in the amount of $300 per week for UI claimants, which augments that maximum weekly payment of $450 per week. And additionally, qualifying households are eligible for $600 stimulus payments. So both of those programs will help households stay afloat and will boost consumer spending. We have a new president, Joe Biden, in the Oval Office, along with the US's first female vice president, Kamala Harris. She's the highest ranking female elected official in US history, and the first African American and first Asian American vice president. Regarding the coronavirus, we are seeing the 7-day daily average of new cases declining, hinting the second wave is coming to an end in Los Angeles County, as long as everyone does their part in controlling the spread. And we're seeing thousands of people signing up to get COVID-19 vaccines, which gives us hope that at the end of 2021, we'll be able to bring the next new year in with our friends and family in person, and maybe even as part of a crowd. Up next, Bill and I will be answering questions.
Shannon, I first of all appreciate your comments very, very much, as always. There are 3 or 4 questions in the Q&A section. I'm going to quickly get to them because I also want to leave time for Shane to promote the forecast. And we've only got about 4 minutes left in our allotted time with folks. The first question was, if the COVID restrictions continue for a few months more, how do we see the recovery of the economy regarding restaurants? I would say the longer those restrictions apply, particularly to full service restaurants, the harder it will be for them to recover. They're down 49% in employment year over year in full service restaurants. We've seen a very large number of them, thousands of them closing permanently in our region. And so you may have additional thoughts on that. I'll just touch on the other 2 questions so you can be aware of them. The question of whether any of the fraud that has been publicly reported in unemployment claims in our state was included in your numbers of claims. I assume they all were included, because I think the state is still trying to work out which ones were fraudulent and which ones were not. And finally, to what extent has unemployment rate drop reflected folks dropping out of the labor force? Clearly, there have been, I think, about 260,000 people who've dropped out of the labor force in terms of civilian employment counts year over year. So those aren't necessarily reflected in the unemployment rate. But didn't know if you wanted to add any color to any of those 3 questions.
There was an uptick in the number of claims associated with the PAU program in the recent weeks. And so the EDD is starting their investigation into those claims again. So it's in the process of, they're in the process of determining how much of those claims are legitimate and how many are fraud. Let's see. As I did mention in the presentation, the unemployment rate, of course, is the share of individuals who are classified as unemployed over the size of the labor force. So if you have people dropping out of the labor force, it will affect the unemployment rate, because you're changing the denominator of that ratio. So it does affect the unemployment rate. It will cause it to rise a little bit. So that's likely where some of that increase is stemming from. But it doesn't mean that we're in a better situation. What it actually means is that there are more discouraged individuals who are no longer looking or actively seeking employment. And so that doesn't mean that we're in a better situation just because we see changes in the unemployment rate, because we have to factor in what is happening in the labor force.
And just quickly, I think there's a question about what measure of unemployment, U6, U8, are we using? And are the numbers different if we include discouraged workers and underemployed workers? And yes, of course, the numbers are different.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, we're using the standard unemployment definition. So as you start looking into smaller geographic areas, some of that information is harder to come by. So of course, if you are factoring in discouraged workers and those who are underemployed, it would boost those unemployment figures up.
Finally, how does all this interact with the governor's easing of restrictions? I think we're encouraged by the governor easing restrictions, but only if we go about relocating in our workplaces safely. And then again, a plug for all of you to go to saferatwork.la and learn about what we mean by that. We think it's healthy for people to get back out of their homes and into safe public environments, but to do so as safely as possible. I just want to reserve the last moment here for Shane to give you the particulars about the February forecast, because Shannon and her team and our incredible national thought leaders will be giving you much more information on this and other aspects of where we are and where we're going as a region. Shane?
Absolutely. Thank you, Bill. And thank you, Shannon, for another great presentation. Excited to have these monthly briefings back. So as Bill mentioned, our upcoming annual economic forecast, it is going to be on Wednesday, February 17th. My colleague Ricardo, I believe, just put in the registration link in the chat box for everyone to access. You will, because you attended this webinar, will also be receiving the e-blast with further information on this. But we're very excited this year, as Bill mentioned in the beginning, to secure our opening and closing keynote speakers. Our opening keynote speaker this year is going to be Amy Liu, the Vice President and Director of the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program. Extremely excited for her to speak to her experience working across the country with cities as they start to plan. And then our closing keynote for this year is going to be Bruce Katz. He is actually the founder of that same program that Amy oversees. And he is the founding director of the New Localism and of NOWAC Finance Lab at Drexel University. And so Bruce is going to be speaking to what an equitable recovery will look like and kind of some next steps for everyone who participates that can be applied to their respective institutions and businesses. In addition to our opening and closing keynote speakers, this year we're doing something a little bit different with the economic forecast and hosting 3 breakout discussions, which will be highlighting reskilling and upskilling of LA County, policies for an equitable recovery, and equity in exports, increasing market access for minority-owned business. So we highly encourage everyone to participate. Email me if you have any questions, and please go to the registration link in the chat box to register. And you can email me at shane.cullen@laedc.org. And you can email me questions about the economic forecast or any questions that you would like to have answered in these monthly briefings, so we can make sure we get it to the appropriate colleagues of ours. We also, as always, encourage all of you to visit the LAEDC COVID-19 response page for additional resources at laedc.org/coronavirus. With that, thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you both at the economic forecast as well as our next briefing on Monday, February 22nd at 11 a.m. Pacific. Thank you and have a wonderful week.